Oh, we're online.
There we go. Facebook Live. You feeling stressed, Milo?
Yeah, sometimes they stress me out a little bit. Not as much now, but yeah, stressed. My palms are sweaty. My knees are weak, and let's just go on the wrap.
Yeah. Cool. You've been listening to rap music this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about stress and weight loss or fat loss today, which I think is something that I think has been around the sphere a lot, and I think often it's disregarded as slightly woo-woo. It's a bit of like it's often used as like it's probably not that, if that makes sense. It's often kind of used as an excuse and not necessarily understanding what its implications might actually be. So Milo, tell me, bare bones of it, can stress actually affect weight loss?
The bare bones, yes.
Cool, great talk.
No, like if you think of like how it actually affects us, is that, you know, like think back to a time when you were stressed, like how you perceive everything is completely different. I think there's lots of changes that happen when we are stressed in our body that just affects what we do on a day-to-day basis, and suddenly little things which don't normally annoy you end up annoying you and feed into that.
When we just to clarify before we go into this further, when we're talking like this and we refer to stress, how do you view that? How do you define that in this context?
Like, think of stress as basically everything in our environment. So everything in our environment is a stressor. You know, we have good ones and bad ones. But I think, you know, a lot of what we think of stress as a negative thing. What, you know, normally makes us make bad decisions or makes us feel completely overwhelmed emotionally or struggle with getting by in life. And it is that as well. And I think a good analogy of stress is the bucket analogy. Like, just think of it, everything in our life, from the finances that we have, from our job, from our social life, they all add a certain amount of stress to a bucket. And when we add a little bit too much stress into that bucket, that's when things start to overflow.
I missed some of that gold, Milo. My internet connection randomly dropped out. So yeah, I just want to hit on one of those points that you made there. So like stress, when you say stress is our environment, it's probably better clarification on it. Like, stress is anything in our environment that affects us, right? So you're right in the fact there could be good and bad stresses, but for it to be a stress, it has to be something that influences us in some way, shape, or form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
And inside of that, like arguably a good stress could be, you know, spending time with friends and family and having a social outlet, whereas negative stresses could be anything from mental, emotional components, where that be, you know, work is really quote unquote stressful. You know, we're under a lot of pressure. There's a deadline looming. We're not sure we're going to meet it. Physical stresses, arguably good versus bad in like the intensity with which you exercise. And then even, you know, certain little kind of biological stresses in like what our nutrition's doing to us, our quality of sleep, all those bits and pieces. That about right?
Yeah, that's about right. Like, everything from the fact that, you know, I have a skylight here and there's a lot more light in this room when I'm doing this, it's probably a good stress. Like, if this was just a dark, dingy room, suddenly I might actually experience a little bit more stress on that front.
So let's, with that in mind, and you and me being nerdy, having to super clarify these things. With that in mind, so we're going to be talking about, as most people will perceive it, bad stress, probably primarily mental, emotional stress, pressures, you know, time crunches, relationship stress, all those bits and pieces that we naturally perceive as stress being imposed on us. How, I mean, I know you've kind of dug into this recently. How do you see that as affecting many people's weight loss?
Like, think of it when we're kind of stressed, basically there's just the science behind it. Like, it inhibits our non-critical functions, which we could argue are very critical, i.e. digestion, reproduction, just your repairs of cell and your immune system. But how that actually manifests in people is potentially poor sugar management, depression, sleep disruption, cravings for different foods, etc. So if you think of how that stress actually affects our body, leads to all of this. And then the knock-on effect is that because of the stress that we're experiencing, intensifying hunger, it also, a big one as well, it changes our priorities. Like we might have this weight loss goal, but we can't think about that because we've currently got this deadline at work looming over our heads. So we can't think of this long-term goal.
So there are huge and like multifaceted implications of stress on weight loss. And like, so for me, if we think about what we're referring to here, which is our stress response, you know, that's something that we've evolved to, arguably for an environment that no longer exists, you know, being traced by a predator or essentially starvation, you know, when we're being forced to forage for food. The way that we experience stress now is so much more chronic than it used to be, especially if we don't have adequate strategies, which we'll talk about in a moment, in dealing with that stress. Stress should be, exactly as you said, it's a short-term experience where our body's physiology literally changes to, I need to survive this situation and I'm going to turn certain stuff off that's meant for the long term and the longevity, because I need to survive this current stressful situation that is short-term. The problem is most of us haven't learned how to either change our perception of that situation or switch off that stress response, which then leads to all those negative things that you spoke about. And that, you know, that could be anything from, you know, changing how our like the bugs in our stomach basically function, making us potentially chase after more sugary, more processed foods. Again, blood sugar regulation, we even in like short-term stress can push us to eat more refined carbohydrates just because it kind of bumps serotonin. It makes us feel a little bit nice, little food cuddle when we're not feeling too good. Sleep, a huge one. We've spoken so many times about how having crap sleep leads you to basically eat more crap. And then exactly like you said, not only short-term, having that stress environment, we're not going to focus on things, but chronic stress makes focusing harder. It makes certain alterations in the way our brain operates so that we then become a little bit more scatty and it's harder to focus on the bigger picture. So yeah, I've rambled on that one, but we can see that there's a lot of very obvious ways that stress, not only in the short term, but especially the long state or the chronic stress can make a huge difference to fat loss, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like you just think of that chronic, like, you know, if we are, let's just say, overworked and we're working from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single evening, like you just think of it, we've all heard of like the rest and digest and the flight and fight response in our nervous system. And you just think of it like waking up 7 o'clock, getting onto work, and then the only relaxing thing you do is actually going to sleep at 11 p.m. That shifts our body too far in one way. In that fight and flight, stressed negative response. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people out there whose that is just a typical day, you know, a typical day without balance of some sort of rest and digest actions.
And like we said, this snowballs, doesn't it? Like what starts as a small thing, because you get worse sleep, you get more stress, like it builds, you eat more crap, like you feel unhappy about your weight and how you look, and it just it ends up being a really vicious cycle that kind of builds. But like, so let's keep this brief because we can be boring on this. Like we're agreed, like stress definitely has a huge implication on fat loss or weight loss in general. What are some big things that can make a meaningful change for someone who's experiencing stress, and that being the thing that's hindering their weight loss?
Some big things. Well, I look at this in like there's 3 different ways. There's, first of all, it's understanding what you can and can't control. It's making your day more predictable. And I'll go into these points in a second. And then the last one is putting in place some sort of action to deal with that stress. Because I think, you know, if we ask somebody like, what sort of practice could you do to manage stress? Go out for a walk, meditate, take a nap. These are all things that I think we know that we should be doing and might be good ideas to manage stress. And I can go into a whole host of other things like exercising, seeing a therapist, putting on some music. These are all things that will help with stress. But I think going back to my first point about understanding what we can and can't control, there's a lot of people where, for example, the weather is something we can't control. And a lot of people, like, I had a bad day, it's a gloomy day, and that will dictate your mindset for the day. But, you know, there are things that we can control, and that's your mindset and your actions, because you have complete control over them. Does that make sense on that?
No, 100%. Like, so we've had a conversation in many different ways. What we always come back to is, come on, brain, do what I want you to do. It's principles over tools, right?
Yeah.
Or systems over tools. And what we're saying here is, like, you're right. There are 1,000 tools. And I want to come back to that system that you spoke about, but the end one there was make a positive action. And that in its own, it's such a powerful thing, because even if it's the wrong action, you feel like you're taking ownership, you feel like you're making a positive influence. That changes the whole perceptual thing on the back end. But it also means, if we were to break it down even simpler, do something that makes you less stressed. And that sounds really fucking stupid, but like, there is no perfect solution to de-stressful activities. Find something that makes you feel less stressed than you are, whether that's meditation, having a bath, going for a walk, doing exercise. It's kind of irrelevant, because I imagine if we Googled 101 things to de-stress you, there's probably an article out there. Get the list up, try them, see what, like, do you know what I mean? Tick off the ones that make you feel less stressed and participate in that activity. What we're essentially saying is, in that final part, is do something that is practicing self-care. Whatever works relevant to you, participate in that. Don't be a hero and go, well, I've got to deal with a stressful situation, because again, especially if we're talking something chronic, you not practicing self-care is what's furthering you down that, snowball gaining speed down the hill.
Yeah, I think one important thing you kind of make, like I laid out this system, but at the end of the day, that can be too complicated. But in the end result, taking some action, as you said, is the thing that is going to have the biggest effect. Like, the things which I said above that give you some understanding and meaning to it and are important, but the action is the thing that will benefit you.
Yeah, so I still think the system has a huge amount of merit, because again, we know that as soon as we leave ambiguity, that's almost too complex for everyone, because you don't have something to follow, right? I would flip it, although theoretically speaking, the initial mindset for me is the bedrock. The truth is, like, this all comes down to behavior, right? It's how we are able to initiate these things. And I think action is probably the first place to start, because that's perceptually, it can be the easiest thing. Take 15 minutes to do something that de-stresses you. Once per week, once per fortnight. If you haven't done anything to de-stress you in 3 months, take 5 minutes in the next 2 days. No, take 5 minutes today and build from there. In whatever way that looks like to you, it doesn't have to be too much, but it just has to be take an action of something that you just think would be nice to do, and build on top of that. What were the other two components you mentioned? The first one was basically
knowing what you can and can't control. So the weather you can't control, your height you can't control, your shoe size you can't control. Things that you do have control over, or some control, is your home, your work environment, your sort of support team, and your schedule. And the things that you have total control over, your actions and your outlook on life.
And this is like a bigger picture thinking of, like, number one, if we can just be honest with ourselves and recognize that the things are outside of our control, the less energy we spend trying to control the things that we know we physically can't control, the more we can spend that energy on the things that we can control. Like you say, participating in our support network, our friends, our family, doing beneficial activities like eating well, sleeping well, doing these bits and pieces that make us feel good, and they are within our realm of control. That's going to make a big difference to, again, how we perceive the things that are outside of our control. And that second point that you made, Milo?
It was about basically making your day more predictable. Like, in terms of, and that's basically planning. Like, if I know what I'm doing every hour, or at least I have some idea of what I'm doing most of the day, then there's going to be no unpleasant surprises. But yeah, if my day, I have 20 things that I'm not prepared for come up, that's going to be a stressful day.
Yeah, 100%. So there's a series of experiments that were done primarily on rodents. I think there might have been some monkeys. You can't mention the monkeys one because it's a horrible thought. But basically, they were exposed to a very stressful stimuli, which in this case I believe was an electric shock. And there were different types. So you had a controlled, no electric shock. You had an electric shock that was randomly administered throughout the day, and then you had an electric shock that was administered the same time every day. The stress physiology between, obviously, Mr. No Shock was happy as Larry. The difference between the random shock and the predictable shock was night and day. Because the thing is, again, like if we just think about this conceptually, if I know I'm going to get punched in the face at 1 p.m., I'm probably not going to start worrying about it until like 12:55. If I don't know, if I know I'm going to get punched in the face today, but I don't know when I'm going to get punched in the face today, I'm probably going to worry about it all day. So like even in regards to actual like a stressful stimulus that's outside of our control, if we can fit that into a day where we have, you know, some predictability, that we can kind of have times to switch off, times to worry about it and times to not worry about it, that makes a huge difference to how we, again, experience that same stressor.
Yeah, I reckon we should have changed the title to this to when's Danny going to get punched in the face?
At what time is Danny going to get punched in the face? Yeah. Cool. I think that's it, man. I don't think we should, like, again, it's a big complex thing, and like we mentioned, there's 1,001 tools that you can use for this, but I think what you've put that there is simple. I'm going to rework it though. So I'm going to go first one, take some positive action. You know, any positive action. Do something that makes you feel less stressed. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm not going to give examples. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as it makes you feel less stressed than you are now, participate in that activity and try and build some frequency and time in that. It's called practicing self-care, and you should definitely be doing it. The second one, so I'm properly reversing this. Second one, give yourself some predictability in the day, whether it's just organizing the things, again, that you do have inside of your control. Even if it's just organizing the times where you can be stressed about whatever that stressor is, have some predictability into your day, because it can make at least a portion of your day a lot more relaxing. And then finally, the kind of the big thing that we're working towards inside of this, the ultimate like enlightenment in all of this, is recognizing the difference between the things that you do have control over and the things that you don't have control over. Control the things that you can control and try not to worry. I know this is why I'm putting this as the ultimate alignment. Try not to worry too much about the things that are outside of your control, because the more we waste energy on trying to control those things, the less we're controlling the things that we can actually control and make us feel better. Anything to add, Milo?
No, beautifully summed up.
Perfect. I'm going to write a book on that one. Awesome. Cool. Everyone, thank you for joining us. As always, I hope that was beneficial. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Or as always, if there's anything that you want us to cover, let me know in the comments or shoot me a message. It's always great when we can cover topics that are relevant to you and most helpful. Cool. Thanks, Milo.
Right. Thanks, guys.